Hi, everybody. I'm super excited for this conversation. So thank you so much for spending your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world with us. I am super excited. So I know people will be continuing to join the room, but I am going to kick us off. So welcome to a new Power to Fly Chat and Learn. My name is Rob Rebar. I am the Senior Manager of Community Events here at Power to Fly, joining you from actually sunny New York City for a change. And I'm super excited to moderate today's conversation with Condé Nast's Mel McVeigh about how to build a successful career across product and tech. So before we get started, I'd like to go through some simple housekeeping rules so we can make sure this is a safe and comfortable space for everyone. So first of all, we encourage you to participate. So feel free to turn on your cameras and drop your name and where you're calling from in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. We're also eager to see where our community is located. So this conversation is being recorded. So 2 to 4 business days after the chat, you'll receive a rewatch email with a link to the recording. So if you have to drop off early, don't worry, you can catch the whole recording there. And please note that if you're on camera, you might show up in that live recording. So if that is something you want to avoid, just keep your camera off. And feel free to share any questions you might have in the chat box. If you'd like to remain anonymous, you can always DM me your question and I will ask that on your behalf. So as mentioned, today we have a very special guest from Condé Nast, a Power to Fly partner. Condé Nast is a global media company that produces some of the world's leading print, digital, video, and social brands. And wow, this is a huge list. So I'm just going to name a few here, but these brands include Vogue, GQ, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, Wired, and Architectural Digest, Condé Nast Traveler, among others. And I am a big daily reader of Pitchfork, which is in the Condé Nast family. So if there's music lovers out there, that's another great brand. And Condé's colleagues and collaborators bring big ideas to life through intelligent storytelling with a diverse point of view that underscores all that they can do. And if you're interested in joining their team, make sure you visit their page at Power to Fly, which you can see on the screen here, and learn more about their open roles. You can also click that follow button and find out about any new events and new roles that are going to be added. So check that out. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mel McVeigh. So Mel is a VP of Product, Global Brands, and Commerce at Condé Nast. She leads the digital portfolio across 9 brands: Vogue, GQ, Condé Nast Traveler, Architectural Digest, House and Garden, World of Interiors, Allure, Self, and Glamour. And she also leads Condé's commerce product platform. She says that half my world is imagining and creating things that never existed, designing, building, and launching new consumer products and services. The other half is knee-deep in strategic planning, crafting consumer strategies across multiple lines of business, building digital capabilities, enhancing engagement, and driving strong revenue growth. And across Mel's career, she has worked for publishers and commerce organizations, including Photobox, TUI, Telegraph, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Lonely Planet, and Time Out. So I'm super excited to get this chat going. You've all submitted some really great questions, so I'm going to start with those, but feel free to put your questions into the chat box as well. But welcome, Mel.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
We are excited to have you. So let's start, because you have such an interesting career, starting in creative, and now, as I just mentioned, it's working on all these different capabilities. So we had this really great question, which I think is a terrific way to kick us off, which is creativity is often associated with the arts, while product is seen more as a technical role. So how has your background in the creative field influenced your approach to product development and strategy?
That's a really, really good question. And maybe if I just give a bit of context, I've been in the industry for a very long time and have worked, in a variety of different organizations, like in the intro between commerce and then media and publishing. which actually, in those industries, they kind of create different products. If you're creating a shop, or if you're creating like an editorial platform, while inherently a lot of the technologies are similar, how you might apply it is actually very, very different. And so, and I know, and I've said this to a number of my teams, I've worked in product, and as the intro, like where products don't exist, or where you're optimizing or migrating or building something that does. And when you think about kind of creative skills, on the side of creating something that didn't exist, it's kind of a mystery, right? It's kind of a product that you don't really know what you're going to build until you start making it, right? Which is actually no different to what an artist might do, or even a designer, right? You're imagining something that didn't exist. There might be a formula or a program approach or a framework, but actually ideation skills become really, really, really important. And that's where I anchor back, the beginning of my career as a designer, right? And I didn't actually work I don't come from an engineering or from a business background. I come from a creative designer-led approach. And so these skills around ideation, how you imagine things that didn't exist, and then how you kind of apply that is kind of the first part. But in product, which is that kind of technical or business, and I would describe them potentially as puzzles, right? So if you're doing or scaling big products or big systems and services, often there are formulas and playbooks, right? And within that, you have a mindset of more program management and more that product, how do I release, how do I ship, how do I optimize? And it's interesting. I oscillate between the two, right? And I think that, for a product manager, and I can see some of my teams here as well, that they know that I talk about this a lot, is that a really good product manager or designer can do a bit of both. They understand how to ship, they understand how to plan, but they also know how to ideate things that didn't exist before.
Yeah, I love that approach. I haven't really heard of product being described in that way, but yeah, there's so much imagination that is going into it, just as you would approach a piece of art. And I come from an artistic background as well, and I found so many of the skills that I've learned in that world, how to tell a story, has helped in terms of the business angle that I've been involved in now. And we had another great question kind of around these skills, which is that you've mentioned the importance of soft skills. Could you highlight a few specific soft skills that product managers should focus on developing? Because I've often will have those conversations, and sometimes that storytelling skill is a little bit of a hurdle sometimes when we're coming for some folks who might be from a more technical background. So what kind of soft skills, so-called soft skills, should people really work on developing if they're looking to take their product management career to the next level?
Yeah, so I won't take credit for it, because this came from the two of my first bosses that I had when I worked at Lonely Planet. And I worked in digital capabilities and implementation, a long time ago. And my first two bosses were actually the head of HR, and then I moved to the head of operations. And basically, if I'm sitting on the HR side, he's like, if you want to do anything, you want to change, you want to imagine, a new product surface, you have to understand how people work, how they think, and how they absorb information. And so within that, it's like, how do you tell stories? How do you inspire people with a vision so they'll follow you? Because also, if you're implementing a new thing that's never existed before, all humans are resistant to change. Even I, who love change, is also resistant to it. So you have to take people on a journey, and you don't do that through spreadsheets and through, we're going to make this amount of money. You do it through this kind of emotional storytelling about why you would believe. And that craft of being able to motivate, excite, and take people on a journey is a really important soft skill. And that comes down from understanding how people work, understanding, conflict, understanding communication, and even team building. And building those cultural aspects are really, really important, particularly as you get more senior and you maybe less in the detail of delivering something, but actually into this wider program. My other boss was the head of operations. And he was like, if you're going to run big programs, I actually started one of my jobs as a project manager before product was even a thing. And I was really ambitious, and I wanted to run this massive big program of about 10 different work streams. And he said, you're not capable of doing that. So what I'm going to do is give you one big meaty project. And then when you've done that successfully, I'm going to give you 2. And then when we've done that, you're going to do 10. Because actually, if you can run a program and you understand the processes, also to keep people kind of clear and on board and kind of navigate, then actually, again, you can scale. You can scale programs, you can scale initiatives, and you can run multiple work streams. And like, that's probably actually one of the biggest piece of advice that, that I was given. I actually apply that even with my teams. I've got many ambitious people in my team or in anywhere I've worked. And it's like, I'm going to scale you up, right? Let's give you one big meaty project, and then I'm going to give you two, and then I'm going to give you five, because it literally comes back to managing people and managing process. And then within that, going back to, you can add creativity and curiosity, and then you can add performance. But if you don't get structure right and people are misdirected, they'll go in 100 directions. And if they can't align to a vision, then they're not going in the same direction.
Yeah, I love that. I think some businesses make the mistake of, oh, we're going to throw all this stuff at someone and have them learn, but that's a quick way for that person to burn out or stumble. So I love kind of the idea of, okay, we're going to start you with one, then we're going to move you to two, and then we're kind of going to go up from there, which I think is such a great way to really have someone learn through doing the process. And it's kind of starting them off at the shallow end of the pool rather than just throwing them into the deep end.
I'm a big advocate of learn by doing, right? But within the safety of, like, it's not, projects aren't designed for you to fail, right? It's to stretch you, and people have strengths and weaknesses. But I think it's really important as you go through your career and you look back. I mean, I look back, I started with one tiny project, and yet here I am managing a global, program with multiple teams and multiple locations. That's not possible without the foundations, that I was given. And I do go back to those two mentors that I had, who said people and process. Everything else kind of can cascade from that. Yeah. And that's what I would say to anyone, right?
I love that. Yeah. And yeah, good pieces of advice never go holds. So yeah. And we have some, we'll say on this skills kind of tangent that here, because someone was also asking, can you elaborate on the role of business skills in the career growth of a professional in product and tech, which I think is so interesting, because so many of us who are either on maybe on the artistic side or on the technical side, we're focusing on those things, but we're not thinking sometimes about, okay, but how does this strengthen the business, or what is the business role that this has? So how did you kind of wrap your head around that? And what are other, specific maybe business skills that folks should have if they're looking to advance their career in product and tech?
In a real practical, like high level, you need to understand how the business makes money. I mean, product is very user-centric and very customer-centric, and it's really you will unlock opportunity through the context of the user if you really focus on what they need. But on the other side, and I have worked with a number of people who are often resistant to it, which is kind of I find it's a bit strange. It's like, how does a company make money? Like literally, like where is where it makes its revenue? And Condé is very interesting because it makes revenue in multiple ways. And then, like, where are the biggest opportunities for growth? And I get, like, early in my career, I couldn't read a spreadsheet, right? I'm a creative, so I give me a visual and I can interpret it really quickly. And I'm hyper aware that spreadsheets and numbers it's a strong suit of mine in terms of being able to understand data. But if you get all the acronyms of a P&L on a spreadsheet, etc., it can be quite overwhelming. But it's really important to understand those kind of narratives, because ultimately people that make the decisions of your projects are often the finance team. And when we talk about storytelling, it's not ultimately about telling one story. You need to be able to tell your story to the person you're describing it to. So I can have a pitch deck and explain it to an HR person and to a finance person very differently. But ultimately, the people in the teams that tend to drive prioritization are the ones that hold the money, right? Where they can see growth, or where they understand where their costs are being spent. So if you can tell your story in that way, like, that's a really important skill to have if you work upstream in any kind of consumer facing, or to be fine, even in any technical product, right? Like, if product is creating cost to the business, you need to be able to understand what that is, to then understand, well, how am I going to invest in it? How am I going to optimize it? Well, how am I going to reduce costs, or how am I going to grow it? Right. So the real key is understanding how the business makes money, right? And then being able to tell your story through that lens.
I love that. I mean, it sounds so simple or fundamental in a way, but knowing, okay, how does the company I work for actually make money that then gets paid to me too. So I love that kind of going back to those basics there. And yeah, when I'm working on stuff here at Power to Fly, I'm always thinking, okay, so how is this bringing in new revenue? Or if it's not bringing in new revenue, what else is it doing? Is it enlarging our community, for example, which might not be driving revenue, but it's adding something else that's beneficial. So really kind of looking at all your products and going, oh, if this isn't doing one of those two things, maybe I shouldn't even be working on it, or raise that to the manager.
It's the basis of prioritization, right? But like prioritization for a lot of people can just be a spreadsheet, but actually it's not the spreadsheet. It's like literally hunting for like those nuggets, which is kind of ironically what I was thinking before. Like that's where the creativity comes, which is an element of curiosity. Like you're going on a treasure, you're trying to optimize for things. Half the time it's a bit of a treasure hunt because you're looking at the data, trying to find patterns, trying to find opportunities to then grow your business. And that is often through a user lens, through the behavior of the customer, through what's happening. And those skills are actually very hard to teach unless, but they're very hard to learn on the ground. So it kind of goes back to giving teams stuff that I probably can do much faster than, not just me, but a lot of the senior leaders can do, but actually accepting that giving it to the next, up and coming group of leaders is important. It might take them a little bit longer time, but my job isn't doing the work so much anymore. It's effectively art directing, right? I am crafting and directing so that more people can have that skill set rather than having a single point of contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my biggest learning when I became a manager was like, don't do it all, because yes, I love that because I was have that same thing. It's like I can do this a lot quicker, but then it's like, wait, someone else isn't learning there. So I love that. And it kind of brings me into the next question, which I saw in the chat, which is, these are all really great things, but, you talked about learning on the go and learning while you're doing it, but someone was asking, are there trainings that you would recommend to gain some of these skills? So maybe besides actually obviously doing the work, are there other trainings or other resources that people can look towards?
Yeah, well, so there's two parts. I mean, I would answer that in two ways. One is there are a lot of organizations globally that I would get involved in, right? So whether it's Mind the Product, which has a very, I'm going to focus very much on product because engineering has a lot of certifications and things that you need to learn. You can either go through an industry-led, and design is the same. There's a kind of a more path where you can either be, do a design degree at a university, you can, very specific training in Figma or different, technologies. Product for me is a bit more amorphous in terms of it's a lot of collections of skills. If I think about product, and I would, again, advice I would give to anyone is get involved in the community, right? For a number that you get soft skills because you can hear loads of people talk. Mind the Product has an incredible, ecosystem, as does Women in Product, of talks and people and networking, etc. And then to be fair, I haven't actually, I didn't study product, but there are a variety of online courses that you can do, but they will give you the really foundational process. You could do a project management certification, right? Like all of those elements are kind of part of your tapestry. But the key thing is then actually getting on the job experience, right? Like doing those foundational courses and then using your network to get your first job if you're early career. And then if you're mid-career, finding jobs. And I was actually talking to someone about this last week, which is once you get into the kind of system, be very, very clear which job or what area you want to go into, because those skill sets kind of determine where you go next and where you go next after that, right? So look at the university courses, look at the online, find it for the skill sets that you have, and then use that then to build a career path off the back of that. Some people would say do an MBA. And that's true. And I know that in a couple of organizations, like maybe Amazon or Google, it is required. So what I would say is go through the job specs of those organizations and see what they're asking for. That will tell you the kind of areas you need to look rather than do this course or do this course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Power to Fly has lots of great product talks here as well that people can join. And kind of is great because you mentioned early career, you mentioned people maybe in the middle of their career. And we had a question where people are saying, what skills or practices moved you from a mid-level leadership to a senior leadership? I think that's really interesting because a lot of people feel like have that struggle of like, okay, I get to the mid-level, but how do I get to that senior level?
God, I can kind of remember. I was overly ambitious when I was younger. And I think I had some incredible mentors so my biggest challenge mid-career was delegation. because, to your point before, I could do things a lot faster, and I was in that kind of managing 3 or 4 team scenario. And I'd got to a buffer where I was very, very able to run sort of a program, probably effectively at a group product director level, right? So it's 3 or 4 teams working kind of on 1 to 2 ecosystem. And then at the job that I was at prior to here, I actually got an executive coach off the back of the advice of the CEO, which was, you have an extraordinary talent, but for you to scale, you actually need to let go, right? And letting go meant that, the majority of my job now is actually coaching and guiding other people, right? It is why I can run 9 brands, globally. And that is a real skill that required a lot of coaching and on the job around how I presented, what my leadership style was, because leadership and management are fundamental different things. So transitioning from a manager to a leader, then effectively into a coach. And that was quite hard because I am naturally quite, I like owning my products, right? Because obviously I want to see them end to end and I want to grow them. But it was the delegation that was the transition. On the other side, for every jump that I've had, if I go back to early career, normally I would have applied for a job that I didn't get. So like, let's say I was at Lonely Planet and I wanted to be the product director of all of Lonely Planet. And at the same time, I was moving to the UK and I didn't get the job at the time, which was fine because I then moved to the UK and career shifted. But when I didn't get the role as the kind of head of digital, I went to the recruiter, he was actually a guy at the BBC. He wasn't a recruiter, but the person that was hiring. And I said, why did I not get the role? I had all the ingredients. And he said, you had all but one, which was you didn't have P&L experience. You had everything else, ops, planning, blah, 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 but you didn't actually have experience of running a P&L. And I said, okay, so what should I do next? And he said, right, so you're moving to the UK. I wouldn't actually stay in product. If you want a hot house running a P&L, move agency side, right? So I moved to agency side, and within 12 months, I've been running a P&L. So I think also these jumps were, if I'd applied for a job or been asked to apply for a job and didn't get it, I sat down and went, where are my skills gap, right? And then went and made sure my next job had it. I had another one, which was I didn't get a role a number of years ago because I didn't have video experience. So I spent a lot of time, working at Condé, getting this video. So it's almost like I know if I'm trying to create this kind of portfolio view of my skills, I'm also hyper aware of my gaps.
I love that. Yeah. And I think even when you're looking at your resume and going, okay, where can I fill in or after the fact? And there's so much that you said I love like the differences between management and leadership, which I think is so key. And also just the idea of getting your executive coach too. I think like we often think of mentors for someone who's in their early career, but really you can get a mentor or a coach and really benefit at any point in your career, which I just really love.
Yeah, and observing other people, which is why the networks are key, because different people have different presentation style. I'm a little bit, I won't say unique, but because my background is a little bit more broad and creative, I haven't followed that traditional product path. But you do, I've got loads of peers and people I greatly admire that have followed a different path. They also have different leadership. So it's kind of interesting how, those flavors work, but it also means then, to some extent, you also then are really suitable to certain types of organization, right? Mm-hmm. And being really, and owning that is really key also for that next level. There are areas or industries I wouldn't work in because I know I wouldn't thrive, therefore I wouldn't lead well, therefore we wouldn't actually make good products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. And someone is asking about without having a technical background, which of course you were coming from an artistic background. They're saying what's a piece of advice for someone who wants to pursue a career in product, but they don't have that technical background? How can they leverage other experiences there? So you've touched on some of this, but if there's anything else that you can share on that point.
Yeah, so I think that product is quite a hot topic around the world right now in various forms: startup, big business, like commerce, publishing. My advice would be, if you're looking to move into product, look at the industry or the organizations that you want to work for. So let's say you want to get into finance or fintech, or you want to work in health, and kind of find an area where, if that's the case, you might go startup. You might get an assist if you've already got skills in that area of health, but you want to move into product. Then find industry or companies you can work for in that space, and then try and get an entry-level job. Because if you've already got a passion for that area, at an APM level, right, or early career, most good hiring people are looking for intent and ambition, not necessarily skill, the soft skills, right? If you're someone that's going to learn, like I look for people who are really keen to learn, and you can see it in their follow, because if they can learn, I can teach them, right? Whereas, some skills you can learn at school, but actually it's that more energy that you can kind of see and feel in an interview that I'm prepared to give someone a go, right? But they have to be passionate about the thing they want to work for, right? And then it's entry level, then you learn on the job, right? Most of my team have actually come from a learning on the job environment, and some of them have been really like bullshit and come to me and said, I'm in editorial and I want to be product. Okay, we've given them, or I work in product and I want to move into product commerce. Okay, we second them into a project, right? Then they're learning, and then all of a sudden, 6 months later, they're actually doing that job and they kind of haven't realized. Well, not that they haven't realized, but they become more formally in that role, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the great thing about a organization with the scope of Condé Nast, where you have the ability to kind of move through different departments and work on different roles there, which I love. And Neely was asking in the chat kind of the opposite of the question I was just asking. They were saying they're coming from a technical background, but pivoting to product management career. They don't have certificates, but they really understand the soft skills, and really how do they market themselves in that way. So when you're applying to roles, what should people do to market when they're looking to make that pivot?
Yep. If you can, try internally first. I'm a really big advocate of that, because if you can find an advocate internally who's prepared to give you a go, it really is going to help you transform your career for the next role. Because I even said before, I do look at people who've had experience, right? So while sometimes I would love to invest and grow people, on the other side, a lot of my job is making sure people know what they're doing so that we can scale. So going sideways within your organization is step one. Another way of doing it is through the industry and the network. I mean, there are many people in my career, not just at Condé, that I've hired that I've met through a networking event, because they've been bold enough just to say hi, show me their CV, or we have a coffee. And then 6 months down the line, we might have a junior or midweight role. But because I know them already, I'm prepared to and they've kind of stayed in contact, then we've given them a shot at the role. Like, the networking within any product design and tech is really important when you're in mid-career. It's a bit of a lottery. It doesn't happen all the time, but certainly I have done a lot of recruitment, right, through investing in people that I've met at networking events. And then I think it's about, so when you do that, so if you say you're applying for the roles, you can talk about industry involvement, you can talk about, secondments or internships you've had within your organization. So even if you're just there, you'll be good enough for recruiters to say, okay, I'm going to, give this person a shot. That's harder with the higher, the more senior you get. When you get more senior, it is very much around your background. Like if I look at commerce and publishing, it has been really interesting to hire very commerce-centric people inside a publishing organization, because they've come through very, very different paths. The way they're trained and skilled is very different. And you have to find people in the commerce world that can adapt to publishing, and you have to find people in publishing that can adapt to commerce. So then we're looking for people who are multi-threaded, right? And they're not as common as you think.
Yeah. And I think on the networking point, you attending an event like this is great, because we'll be sharing everyone who's on the line your information with Mel, with Condé Nast. So that's getting your one more foot in the door, if you will. So someone was asking too, kind of about they applied for a senior consultant role at another publisher, and they did not get that role because they did not have a media background. Or maybe they didn't get the role because they didn't have a media background. Is that, do people see that as a gap maybe in your resume, or how do you kind of fill that gap there?
Oh, two different questions. So it goes back to what I was saying before. If you're working so you can either follow a path where you stay very industry centric, which is great. Like if you want to say work and travel, and you start in travel and you move around the different organizations, you then become a subject matter expertise. And industries all need that. However, if you want to move, then you are going to have to find jobs that you move. And I have swung media one side, commerce another, media one side, commerce the other. But the thing is, when we are looking for people in media, it is one of the questions, right? If you don't understand sort of editorial, the nuances of creative products, and you come from a very tech background or a very data-led organization, they're not the same thing, right? If you're in a more data-driven, or in fact, a fairly optimized commerce product management, coming into the more existential world of creative and storytelling and video and components on a page, it can be quite like that. Creative chaos won't suit all people. So I don't think the answer is, like, how do I move? It's like, how do you build those skills to show someone that you understand that industry? And I can't tell you how many people we've interviewed, like really interviewed, that might even look good on paper, that have never even looked at our products. It's one of our first questions, like, what do you like about Condé, or what do you like about Vogue? And it's very, very evident if they've looked at our ecosystem. And even if they have all the skills in the world, right? If they can't answer that question, it's kind of a hard no. Because how can you help influence our products if you haven't looked at them before the interview?
Yeah, I've heard that so many times from hiring managers and recruiters, where people even get into the interview and they say like, well, why do you want to work for us? And people don't have an answer there. And but the great thing with Condé is like, there's so much stuff out there that people can absorb. You can go on the individual brands' websites and see those, or look at the apps and things like that. So people can really absorb that. So I definitely recommend anyone who's applying to a role at Condé Nast, take a look at the brands that they do have. There's a lot, so maybe you can't look at them all, but definitely digest some of them there.
And there's no right or wrong, but it's for any organization. If you're working, we had a Lonely Planet, like we have one of the questions always would be, where do you travel? And it didn't matter if you went on a caravan with your family, down like an hour from your house, or even half an hour, or whether you were backpacking through, like Central Asia. It didn't matter what the answer was. You just had to have this energy of travel, whether you were the finance analyst, the product designer, or the editor. Because again, you don't actually, like, you have to kind of feel passionate for where you work. And it does surprise me when people go, and they haven't looked at a single product, or even they just say, I don't really know what Condé does. I'm a bit like, well, then why are you here? Like ultimately, we would never hire an editor on Vogue that didn't love Vogue, right? We're looking for a tone of voice. We would never hire someone on Architectural Digest that doesn't really care about architecture. So I like to apply that, even to my teams, right? If you're going to work on a commerce ecosystem, or even work in storytelling, you really need to care about storytelling, because from that you will design beautiful products, right? Because you're going to be passionate about shipping beautiful things.
No, I love that. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, we've got a couple of questions about shifting landscape. So one person is asking, in a rapidly changing digital landscape, what advice would you give to professionals in product and tech looking to stay up to date with emerging trends and technologies?
That's a big one. I mean, even myself is struggling with some of the speed with it to change. So I had a conversation this morning with a colleague who was a CEO, CTO of a big engineering consultancy. We literally were talking about this question, and having done a few rounds of this, like in the terms of big shifts in technology, it's actually to not get overwhelmed. It's kind of the nature of the curve, right? Whether it's big shifts in e-commerce platforms, or where we are today with AI and ML, like kind of like, it's going to come at you from 100 different directions, but actually focus on what you actually care about, right? Because you can't learn everything, right? So then learn your subject expertise on where you want to be. That can be really hard at the moment. Like, I'm overwhelmed. I can't deny it. Like the amount of, like, every time on my LinkedIn about all the shifts and changes in AI and ML, but it really does go back to, that's always going to happen. So just stay focused, just stay calm, and then absorb what you need. So like, just remove the noise, and like, at the moment, we need to look at commerce technologies and what's that next wave. But we won't look everywhere. We'll just hone in what specifically relates to our business, right? Which at the moment is an affiliate model. So I think that, while extending into, new and potentially exciting, in video commerce or social commerce. So just keep focused and don't actually stress out, because it can become really overwhelming.
Oh, yes, it can. Yeah, I like that. Just like staying focused. There's so much out there, but that might not apply to your role. And so I like that advice. And we also got a live question earlier, just now, asking, kind of applying this to Condé Nast. So they were asking, how is Condé Nast adapting to cultural shifts regarding its readers and reflecting this in the mission of the organization or the products? Because certainly there's been, many cultural shifts, and I'm sure publishing as a whole has been such a always evolving department as well. So yeah, how has Condé kind of shifted itself?
I think we're shifted, but also driving part of the conversation. And I say that with the beauty of Condé is that while we have so many brands, we also operate in so many markets, which means we create content from so many perspectives, right? Like I love watching and observing and like reading the content that we produce in Spain or Mexico or India or anywhere, or even, like for any of our, centers where we have a footprint, because you're part of a local and ultimately a global conversation. And I think that what's really nice is that even if I look at the Met Gala, which now is, while it's an event in New York, we stream it globally on multiple platforms, and this year in 2 languages, right? And that will keep growing, as our audience footprint grows. So I think that like we already do a lot of, global content. I think that the challenge for us is meeting our customers where they are. So it's the real changing shift between the social channels, our own owned and operated, how we interweave that kind of conversation so that you can really be at the point where the consumer is, but then also draw them into, our own, because even though you might watch a live stream of Met Gala on YouTube, there's a whole wealth of content that we've got on the website and that we have on our social channels. So how do product bring that all together into a cohesive narrative? That's actually our role at the moment as kind of the owner of the digital experience, is how do we then create kind of hubs or kind of homes where you can navigate all of it, the shopping, the social, the video, the cuts, the interviews, through this kind of live event and then into longevity. And I think that with some of the new technologies, we try and experiment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? Always through the lens of the consumer and, and revenue. And then what works, we tend to scale.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting time to do this. And I just love like that you said, like, yeah, so much of it is just experiment. You try to see what's working, and some things work and some things don't. Sometimes I think you're surprised by what actually works and what you was like, oh, that one is, I'm sure that's going to work. And that's the one that doesn't. And then it's vice versa. But that's the fun thing about experimenting and trying things out.
Yep. And I'm a perfectionist, and it's a skill I had to unlearn, right? Because sometimes throwing it into the wild is the best thing you can do, right? Like perfection can be a real killer, particularly in product, because while you might have an element of research, your data might show you something else, right? So I think that sometimes it's just easier to put something out that's not quite perfect, as long as it's not brand damaging, and then learn on the fly and experiment. It's a real learning out of the commerce world too, right? You can optimize faster than you can try and make it perfect and then realize that there's no market fit. Which goes back to do that, you need to be brave, you need to be curious, right? So that kind of creativity that says, yep, let's just put it out there, and then know the processes to kind of fix, amend, and optimize, puts those 2 worlds in balance, right? But you don't take unnecessary risks. That's the process, product, technology person in me, as opposed to educated risks, right? This thing might work or not, but we won't know till we try.
Yeah, it comes back to data. And I just love, like, I always are saying to my team here, yeah, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like,
yes.
All that.
That's the phrase. Yeah.
So we have a question in the chat that's gotten a few pluses in there from Maha, who's asking, I have experience all across the product lifecycle through a variety of jobs, from business development to business partnering and enterprise technology. My issue and good feedback I received is that I've been more of the let me do this based on the data, but I never did metrics, never measured success. And that has been a failing in product interviews. How can I answer questions based on success metrics and criteria? I would feel so weird about throwing out numbers and simply explain the success, both direct and indirect.
So this is a big learning I had mid-career too. So there's product managers that deliver and ship. And a lot of CVs come in as I've shipped this, I've done this, I've delivered this, I've executed this, etc. But most of the question is, what value did it add, right? Like, what value can you show from the work that you produced? So within that, and I'm going to still do it, is I collect case studies, right? Because at any level you get asked that question, like, what value did it contribute? And if you're looking for a senior or product director or VP level, that is a very specific and needed question, because if you're going to be at that level, you're driving value. So that might be, I built this new product and it contributed to this much, growth in revenue. And you may not have been the full driver of that or own the P&L, but you can tell that story, right? Or I was working on a part of a platform and I was able to optimize it for X percentage of whatever KR, OKR that you have. It's really important that you can describe your work in the context of the metrics. It might not be that the metric makes sense to the business. Well, hopefully it does into the business that you're applying for, but being able to tell that story is really important, right? Mm-hmm. And hopefully you have good mentors within your organization and also use, processes like OKRs or KPIs so that you can translate what you have. So I keep a record, right? I still have the case studies because you forget like what metric happened 5 years ago or what happened 10. So I keep a case study, right? So if someone asks, what have I done in travel? I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I can tell a travel story. Or what have you done in publishing? This is what we've done on the Met. This is what we've done on AD. But I can't keep that in my head all the time. So I actually keep a spreadsheet, not a spreadsheet, like a document. But it's really important and it's off our own KRs, OKRs. So in Photobox, it was conversion rate optimization. Like how much did product contribute to the EBITDA of the company? That's a lot of like finance terms. At Condé, we use things like time spent and we use things like, that's on the advertising or even, advertising metrics and commerce might be revenue. So it's really about saying, this is what I delivered, impact that I had, and this was my involvement in it.
There's lots of people commenting in the chat. Hype docs are very important. Someone was saying really on the product person to really define what those OKRs are. And just one follow up to this, Maha was just saying that they're currently unemployed and they don't have the records. I have the value, but not the measured value. Is there anything else to add to that?
So then go see if you've got anyone in your network that works so that can give it to you. Right. Mm-hmm. And then from future facing, keep a record because that's what happens, right? When you leave an organization, if you haven't sort of written it down, it's very hard to collect. But if you know someone prepared to share like a headline, and I've done that before, I've had to go back to ex-colleagues and say, oh, by the way, can you just remind me of that stat? They're not breaking confidentiality by doing that. It's a broad stat. Like I don't have anything like in my narrative that would break confidentiality. It's just a broad statement of what I've done and what I've achieved.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, and I've done that as well. Someone was saying they joined today's session after seeing your personal site. How have you found a way to balance your personal creation with product creation? Is there an overlap? And how early on in your career did you begin this practice?
Okay, so I'm actually a trained photographer. That is actually my first job. So I actually studied fine art. I actually have a Master of Fine Art. So the long answer to that is I actually have kept those two worlds very, very separate up until recently. So when I moved to the UK, whether this was by benefit to me or not, when I was applying for jobs, I had a path to go down actually creative director, art director role, or into strategy and digital. Rightly or wrongly, I went for the money because there's a lot, I was raised, I had a family in the UK, so I went the digital route and it was a very fork in the road. But one of the advices that I got was to remove all the creative from my narrative, which I did for about 4 or 5 years. And I actually really struggled with that, I think, mentally and emotionally, because I'm an artist by background. And if I'm really, really honest, over the last couple of years, I stopped making it, I used to exhibit quite a bit. So I actually stopped making work. And in the last 2 years, I've made work, actually my first exhibition in 10 years. So this is very new for me. It's a little bit like, I've worked a lot, like actually with a coach to kind of bring these two stories. I think Condé is perfect for it because the type of work that I have. And I'm interested to keep people's feedback because it's not natural, but I'm kind of sort of weird. I don't want to lie about the fact that I come from an artistic background and that I exhibit. Nicely at the moment, the two worlds are converging. Like I'm going to speak shortly at Photo Vogue about the nature of storytelling and AI and photography. And I'm really like in a good position to talk about that because I'm a photographer by nature. I work in the industry. I'm a trustee on a board in the UK. So I advise photographers as well and artists, but I can also really talk tech. And so I'm actually going to leverage that uniqueness. Not sure that answers it because I've only just recently done it.
I love that. Well, congratulations. That sounds great. Yeah, I've had that same struggle because I've worked in theater and I've kept that on like my LinkedIn, but then you go, should I take that off? Like, how is that going to read to some people? But ultimately it's like, I'm keeping it on because that's the full that's the full picture of me. And I know what I have done in those other fields, even though it's not what I'm doing now, has
Yeah.
really strengthened who I am.
And people ask me, they go, why do you know this? Or how do you know this? And I have a very eclectic career. And like some of the skills go back to one of my first jobs, like which is as a tour guide, right? Which sounds really odd, but like when you tell those stories, you also come across as more human. And even though that job was a very long time ago, if you've ever run a tour with 30 people across Central Asia and Russia, you learn a lot about managing people. But that's a really big part, but it's also eclectic and it kind of shows the human. And for an organization like Condé, like it's a really, not a valuable, but it's like not a soft skill. It's just something part of the tapestry, which means that when I work with Traveller, you know, like it's not just that I'm a product person on Traveller. I mean, I'm a traveler, right? So I can really influence not just the product, but also the experience. And I have the trust of the editor, and we talk a lot about kind of the opportunities, and I can enhance the product accordingly, right? So in these worlds of particularly creative product industries, my boss called me a method product manager once, you know, being able to talk to the thing that you love, or it just shows that you're going to be able to influence it in a positive way, rather than this is my job and I go home at 5 and here's my backlog and yes, I'll get back to you tomorrow. Doesn't help, right?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think people, hiring managers, talent acquisition folks, they want to see the full human being when they're interviewing someone. They want to know who you are. And also because that also helps know, are you going to be a culture value fit at the company? Like I think as well. So I definitely encourage everyone to do that.
And I'd add one more
yeah.
thing. So one more, in that is knowing who you are, because it also means that even if a company on paper sounds perfect, you might not be a right fit. So often when I've interviewed, I do actually say, if you want a very operational, structured delivery product person, I'm not actually the right person for you, right? So if you want someone that gives you that and has that structure, and I've got an incredible team around me who really help me scale. But my beauty is in the vision, in the ideation, in the creation, and in things that don't exist. So if you need that in your organization, then I'm perfect. I give you a bit of both. But if you want to have me do one area, I won't actually thrive and won't do well. And so I think you have to be really knowledgeable also where you thrive. And I've had jobs on paper where I've wanted to work for an organization, and I go to the interview and I'm like, this won't work. So that's okay. Like I'm confident enough to know. And even companies that I thought I'd never work for, I did, and they were some of the best jobs I've ever had because the culture was perfect.
Yeah, no. Well, and actually that someone was just asking that in the chat, what is a good way to gauge the culture of an organization when you're doing the interview? Because sometimes it can be hard to know that just from a few conversations until like you start working there. So what would you suggest?
It's in the questions, and when someone says, "Oh, you've got any questions at the end?" I mean, we get asked a lot, like, "What's the culture? What do you like about working at Condé? You know, how do you support people's career development?" That might not be your first question in your first interview, but as you go forward, you know, these are questions, because it's like, I'm working for you, and then what are my benefits? But it's also how do you help develop people's skills and career? I'd ask things like, I'd try and find out about attrition, like how long has the team been in place? Because that will give you a signal about whether or not there's high turnover. So there's ways that you can ask questions that kind of get a sense of, you know, the culture. What's the diversity mix? You know, like, and how does that, you know, like, and you know, and all those kind of elements. Because you go to what's kind of organization you want to work for. And I love Condé for its global nature, right? We have people from all around the world, cultures, languages, skills, etc. And that's the beauty. But you then also have to ask, you know, hours, times of day, you know, how flexible are you? You know, if you've got a family, like all those questions are really important. You've got a family and this company wants you to work, you know, 12 hours a day and there's no flexibility. It's just not going to work, right? So you also have to understand the life that you're living or the life you want to live, and then kind of ask those questions, right? Because it will give you that temperature check.
Yeah, and benefits can tell you a lot. So if you're, say, a member of the LGBTQ community, like I am, you might be looking, oh, are they doing adoption, helping with adoption or fertility, or, you know, people transitioning as well. Like, so a lot of, you can see those in their benefits, and you can go to Condé's page on Power to Fly and read a lot of their benefits on there as well. So check that out. And here's another really great question, kind of going back to some of the things that we were talking about evolution and change. Andrea was asking, their background is in digital marketing and brand management. Considering the rapid evolution of technology, how does Condé Nast balance preserving its traditional brand identity while embracing digital transformation?
I don't think that they're different things. I mean, I think that I think that a lot more organizations can do better to blend the two worlds together. Like digital is a really big part of your ecosystem, right? It's not just a website, or it's not just a social channel. The content that you create is more than likely consumed in a digital context. I think that the channels don't change. It's ultimately the story you're trying to tell, if that kind of makes sense. So I feel that if we're looking at where audiences are or brand positioning, just because Vogue's a historical print brand doesn't mean that that doesn't translate online, right? We're still telling stories, doing cover shoots, doing interviews with models, actors, celebrities. We're still looking at fashion trends. The way that we share that is through a different piece of technology, not a piece of it's paper and it's digital, right? And we weave that in a kind of omni-channel based on. There's still a lovely aspect of reading a magazine. There is a structure and a narrative to how you open and read a book. Our job is to translate that really tactile experience into a digital one, which is a little bit more snack bite, a little bit more consume a little bit here, a little bit there, but a lot of the content's actually the same, just shared differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll shout out, I'm a big physical media person, so I still do I still love an old-fashioned magazine that I can also touch in my hand, although I'm also on the websites all the time too, so
Yeah.
You're right, you need both. And before we run out of time, maybe one other question I wanted to touch on is, someone was asking any advice on how to navigate networking in exclusive industries such as fashion and luxury. And maybe you can also, maybe this is a misnomer. People, I think, would think, oh, Condé Nast, Vogue, New Yorker, these are very elite brands, and I can't get into that world. So is there anything about people kind of navigating that networking, or is that also just maybe a fallacy that that's not really a hurdle?
I don't think it's a fallacy, but I think that if you put that they're cliquey and elite and etc., then I wouldn't be working for Condé Nast. I mean, I'm an Australian from Melbourne, right? I landed in the UK, and I think through my networking, some of this is about not sometimes you need to, it's not just the next person you meet, it's just the person and then the person, and it's a little bit more serendipitous, and you have to trust the process. But if it was so exclusive, then technically, I wouldn't be working at Condé Nast. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't go to a posh British private school. I come from the suburbs of Melbourne. But I think that on the other side, the networking element is just being a bit more bold and introducing yourself, but also having a point of view, right? My actual into Condé, if I'm honest, was through Traveller, because I've been traveling for 25 years. So not only have I worked in travel and worked for many, major travel kind of publishers and commerce companies, I travel all the time. So it's kind of an asset for someone like Condé that's trying to look at how they grow their travel portfolio. And then through that, I mean, I'm massively into photography, but fashion's not, I shouldn't say this out loud because I lead on Vogue, but my on Vogue is photography. It's on storytelling. Photo Vogue was I had it. I mean, being part of Photo Vogue was a dream of mine, right? So pinching myself, that I'm now working with Alessia on Photo Vogue. But I think that the networking thing is that you have to be really passionate. And I think in the fashion, travel, media, photography, you have to it's kind of from the art school. If I don't make work, there's nothing to talk about. So I can call myself an artist, but if I'm not making anything, nothing to talk about in the industry. And I found it really hard to break back into the photography industry, but I met someone I was introduced to one person, and then that person introduced me to three. And all of a sudden I'm on a bit older, I'm on a board, and all of that and I've made work again, and I'm exhibiting. Now they're helping me curate work. So it's where I am now wouldn't have happened if I hadn't met one person. So I kind of go back to, don't get to the end game and stress. Just go meet people and then talk and make work, talk about fashion, be someone who has an opinion. And then if it's a strong one and one that someone like Vogue or AD likes, then eventually it will connect, right? Same with the New Yorker.
I love that. Yeah, no, it comes back down to passion. And I love Yeah, kind of everything that you said, that, yeah, you wouldn't be there if it wasn't it's that culture that you want, which kind of brings me to, like, as we start to kind of wrap up here, love to just finish by diving deeper into what it's like to work at Condé Nast. So before today's chat, we had the opportunity to meet with you and dive deeper into this. So could you just kind of describe Condé Nast culture you described Condé Nast culture as creative collaboration. We've heard a lot of that in your talk today, but could you expand on what that really means for you?
Yeah, I really struggled with the one word. Like our whole DNA is creativity, yeah, which is chaotic. And I say that often in interviews. If you want a very structured organization, Condé is not that, but it's beauty, because if a big initiative comes up like the Met Gala, I still meet people. Our organization's quite large, right? Over 7,000 people. And I still go into projects where I've never met people before. So you instantly have to collaborate, right? And that's over geographies, it's over languages, it's over different geographies and different needs, like marketing 1 minute, technology another, then you're with the biz dev people, and then it's finance. And so that is the culture, and that is where the beauty. I just can't think of any other kind of company globally that has that element that's part of our DNA. And therefore it's really the pride that I feel, and I know my teams do, when we are part of the Met Gala. We're not front of house, but we are making this a global experience.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And when asked about your favorite thing about working at Condé Nast, you mentioned global cross-functional teams and culture. We've heard a bit that you said, there's folks all over the world. So can you walk us through that answer as well?
Yeah, this is like my favorite. I'm so blessed to work at a company like this. I don't think I could ever work for a company in a single market. Within technology, which covers product design, engineering, data, etc. I won't get all the locations, but we're in Bangalore, Chennai, Munich, Madrid, London, New York, and a variety of remote workers. And that then is inclusive then of all our locations and our markets where we have a presence: France, Mexico, etc. And just that global nature. I mean, it's hard. Sometimes the hours aren't great, but the hours are not flexible. We don't we have our core hours, but yeah, sometimes you do an early meeting, sometimes you do a late. But I love working with our team. You learn something, you appreciate the world more, right? You learn a lot about all the different festivities around the world, and we get to celebrate them. And I just think that there's a beauty in that not everyone, if you can get a chance for working for a global company, it is great. It's hard because it's highly matrixed and there's a lot going on. But it really, I don't know, it excites me when I get up in the morning, talking to my different teams around the world. And we even some of us just met recently for the first time, worked for 4 years on Zoom, and we actually got to meet face to face. And there was just so much enriching. It's like I've known these people and friends, colleagues, etc. But then we were actually in London. So that was really nice too. But most of our work is online. And so, yeah, it's the global nature.
Yeah, we're a global company here at Power to Fly too. And I love learning about the different cultures, and being in New York, I have been spoiled and getting to meet more team members than other folks have, although there's many people I still haven't met in person. And so the last question for you before we wrap up, what's, just a real quick, lightning round. What's your advice for someone looking to land an interview at Condé Nast?
Or anywhere. And I've said
or
this
anywhere.
before.
Yeah.
Please come to the interview and have you used the product. I cannot stress enough. Even if you don't feel like you understand it, but if you come into an interview to become a product manager or work on a piece of tech and you don't know anything about it, that does expose you pretty quickly, right? Because how do you add value or even show your passion? Because most of the questions will be around how you add value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And luckily today, Google, YouTube, there's so many resources out there, or to learn more, or of course, just use the product itself.
Use the product.
Love it. Thank you, Mel. This was been fabulous. I loved, learning more about the work at Condé Nast that you're doing, your own passions. So thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with our community. And thank you to Condé Nast for making this event possible. And to our community members, thank you for joining us once again, and make sure you follow Condé Nast on Power to Fly and stay up to date on their open roles, benefits, and more fun events like this one. And if there's anything you missed, you can check out the video when we send it to you a few days from now. But have a great rest of your day. And Mel, thank you again so much.
Thank you so
Talk to you soon.
much. Thank you.
Bye.